Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for that introduction. Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on this incredible program. I was able to listen to the last speaker, Ustadha Fatima, and I absolutely loved what she said, and it was such an enriching experience for me to hear her. The amazing thing is she said so many of the things that I wanted to say, so I'm going to try not to be too repetitive because she covered so much material. You know, as I was thinking about this, I haven't done an MSA talk in a long time, probably because of COVID, and the topic being, you know, tawakkul and keeping conviction under trial kind of brought me back to the last time I was in school. And as you heard in my bio, I went to graduate school, I went to business school at the University of Pittsburgh. It didn't tell you the year though. So I was in school basically 19 years ago. So it brought me back to that moment. And it was in the winter semester, the spring semester in 2002. It was only a few months after 9/11. And we were in the midst of the war in Afghanistan, which is still happening till now. But it was the very beginning. So it was actually in the news. And it was women and men that looked a lot like me that were being demonized. And it was during this time that every political leader and every media personality was on TV drumming up fear and hysteria to take us to yet another war with Iraq. And so I was starting business school at this exact time. And just to set the stage for anyone who's not familiar with most business schools, at least the ones on the East Coast, they tend to be very, very conservative environments. They're not like normal academia where everybody's liberal. This is a very different climate where most people are Republicans and very conservative. And in this case, it was also a class of 150 students, of which 30 were women. So I stood out as I was walking into class on that first day. I was one of 30 women and the only hijab wearing woman in the class. And to say I stood out is sort of an understatement. And I remember walking in that first day into the lecture hall in the midst of this kind of political climate. And I was honestly terrified. I wasn't sure what I was going to experience. And it was a new city for me. I had just moved there a few months before. And I just felt the stares. It was like the whole class just sort of turned around and watched me walk to my seat, and I could like feel their stares on the back of my neck. But I still walked in, wasn't going to hide in the back. I went all the way to the front, walked the entire aisle down, and I wasn't super late, but I was like a minute late. So that was, that was that. So everyone was already seated, and it was like this procession, at least that's the way I perceived it, all the way to the front and sat down. And it was a sort of an act of defiance to sit in the front, because I wanted to feel like I wasn't going to hide, that I wasn't going to give in to this fear. And so I sat in the front row, and then on top of all of that, I decided to even ask a question. And I was the only one who asked a question on the first day. Everybody was trying to, play it cool and hide and not embarrass themselves. But I had already broken the threshold of fear. I was already in that room, standing out, visibly and unapologetically Muslim. And so asking a question and possibly looking stupid was like so small compared to that. And so in some ways, it gave me courage. And it wasn't that I wasn't scared. I was actually very nervous. My voice, I remember, was trembling when I spoke. But I decided in that moment I needed to trust God more than I feared the opinions of other people. And my story is not unique at all. And that's really what I want to talk to you about, that it is so common. And I think probably everyone on this call has a story like this. I remember one woman, one classmate of mine during business school, she asked me if I was majoring in finance, which is kind of a weird question. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, oh, it's just that you're the only one brave enough to ask questions in that class. So, you know, finance, for anyone who hasn't been to business school, tends to be the hardest class for most people. And so everybody's just like, keeps their head down, prays that the professor doesn't call on them, and never talks. And it was especially that way for the women in my class. So no one asked questions. And if there was a question, it was usually a guy or me. I would ask questions every single class. And I did so because I actually didn't understand a lot of it or whatever. There were things I wanted to know more about. And I was kind of fascinated by finance because it was kind of like the science of riba. And I was like, wow, there's a whole entire body of knowledge just around R, you know, riba, the interest rate. And so in some ways it was fascinating to me for that reason. So I would engage the professor, and I totally didn't care if I looked stupid. And so everyone thought I was like majoring in it or great at it because I was so fearless in asking questions. But it wasn't that I was fearless. I just had this attitude of, I'm paying a lot of money to be here. The professor works for me because I'm paying him. Basically, I'm paying his salary. And if I have a question, I should be able to ask it. And so walking into class looking like this, looking like I do already gave me it's like my superpower because of tawakkul. And tawakkul is what I want to talk to you about today. And I know you've heard about it from other speakers, and maybe I can offer some, some slightly new insights. So think about that experience. Think about the last time you may have experienced a moment when you were scared, but you had to do something anyway. You had to walk into that classroom looking different anyway. You had to give that talk even though you were nervous anyway. You had to take a stand to defend someone, and you were terrified to do it, but you did it anyway. And that's what it looks like to have tawakkul. It's about trusting something higher than you. It's about trusting Allah when you don't have the answer, when you don't know the solution, where you don't see the way out, but you trust that the one in control does see the way out and will take you there. So we look brave. Tawakkul looks like courage on the outside. It can look like perseverance, and it can look like hope. And Muslims around this country have demonstrated this resilience. As I said, my story of what happened to me after 9/11 is not unique. And recently, with the election of President Trump, since the 2016 elections, though Muslims have expressed, and justifiably so, fear and anxiety about their place in the country, they've also responded with resilience and solidarity with other marginalized communities. And this idea of fear and anxiety, it's not because folks are paranoid. There's some really important and justified reasons for people to feel afraid. So I work at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I direct research there. And if you're not familiar with this organization, we are a research and education organization that focuses on the American Muslim experience. Basically, we exist to conduct research and educate the public and change makers on American Muslims to support well-informed decisions and dialogue about our community, so that we are basing our perceptions on facts and not fear, that we are rooting, decisions in reality rather than rhetoric or propaganda. So if you're interested in ISPU, please visit our website, ispu.org. And we do sometimes need interns if any of you are interested in research on American Muslims. So what we found, and we do an annual survey of American Muslims around the country, and it's a scientifically representative survey. And we also do the same survey on Americans in general, the general public, as well as Jewish Americans. And so we have a comparison across the board. And Muslims are the most likely to say that they've experienced discrimination in the last year. 60% of Muslims year after year say that they've experienced some frequency of religious-based discrimination. And what really makes Muslims unique, besides that it's the most frequent, group that experiences discrimination for their faith, is that discrimination for Muslims is much more often in the form of institutional Islamophobia, not just individual, meaning they're experiencing discrimination at the hands of government, at the hands of law enforcement, at the airport, even in places like when they're seeking healthcare. And that's much, much, much less frequent among any other faith community. We also found that half of Muslim families say that their children, if they're in school K through 12, have been bullied for their faith. A full half of families have children who are bullied for their faith, and a third of those bullied, a full third, say that the bully is actually their teacher. It's an adult, and that's supposed to keep them safe. We know that hate crimes have literally skyrocketed. The number of hate crimes in 2017 exceeded every year that we've ever measured. So more hate crimes than right after 9/11. And yet nothing had happened. Nothing justifies that except rhetoric from a president that has emboldened violence, hate-based violence against our community and many other communities. We also, experienced 4 years of a president that emboldened white supremacists and campaigned on a, quote, complete shutdown of Muslims entering the country. And he made good on that promise. That was one campaign promise that he actually delivered, right? So when I say people, it's justified for people to feel anxious and to feel scared during this, the past 4 years. And maybe some of you have experienced some of these things. Maybe it's happened to you. Maybe you've experienced a situation where you're sitting in class and your professor says something completely discriminatory, a microaggression or a macroaggression. Maybe it's when you went to seek counseling. I mean, it could happen in so many different places. There's also employment-based discrimination. Now, what has been the response? The response by American Muslims, despite these hardships, despite these real, measurable obstacles, has been resilience, has been an increase in their engagement. So where in 2016, 60% of American Muslims were registered to vote, that went up to 78% of American Muslims being registered to vote, who are eligible to vote, that is, in 2020. And that's a bigger jump than any group we measured. There are also, American Muslims, believe it or not, are more likely than the general public to attend a town hall meeting and even to volunteer in a political campaign. So the response has been greater engagement. It's also been solidarity. American Muslims are the most likely faith community to say they support the movement for Black lives, for example. It's also been pride in who they are and what they believe. So despite being targeted for our faith, the vast majority of Muslims say that Islam is a source of pride and a source of joy in their lives. And then service. One of the ways that folks have responded to this this sense of being under siege is actually to turn around and serve. So especially with the COVID pandemic, American Muslims have responded with compassion. And it's really been heartening because at ISPU, we're documenting and collecting service projects that American Muslims have carried out over the past year to alleviate the suffering of people, ordinary people around the country from the COVID pandemic. And we've documented hundreds of service projects, and that's absolutely an undercount. We couldn't have possibly counted everything, and we probably, this is like the tip of the iceberg. But we've looked at, we've documented projects in all 50 states, including Hawaii and Alaska, where people are responding, Muslims are responding to this pandemic with service. Everything from sewing masks and distributing them during the initial shortage, to providing free mental health care to overworked medical staff, to raising millions of dollars to help those hit hardest by the coronavirus. So how can we remain trusting in Allah even when we're scared, even when things feel overwhelming, even when we feel obstacle after obstacle? How do we stay grounded in tawakkul when we feel so much uncertainty? So much uncertainty around us. First, before jumping into how do we build tawakkul, which I know that you've heard about as well from other speakers, I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of tawakkul. What does tawakkul actually give you when you have this trust in Allah? Why should you care about building tawakkul? What does it do for you? The first thing that tawakkul gives you is freedom from stress, a feeling that it's on you, that is up to you, that you are alone in your hardship. Now, tawakkul is not that you don't work. It's only that you don't worry. Now, we all know the story of the Prophet ﷺ when he was in Ghar Thawr. He was him and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu were being hunted down. They were being chased with 100 camels as the price for their capture. 100 camels would be the equivalent of more than like $500,000 right now. So this was a huge amount of wealth that was being offered to anyone who would bring the Prophet ﷺ, dead or alive, back to the leaders of Mecca. And they were in this cave looking up at the feet of these people who were chasing them, who were hunting them down, who were trying to kill the Prophet ﷺ. And there was literally inches away between them and their potential murderers. And the Prophet ﷺ, in response to Abu Bakr concern that if they just look down, they would see us, Ya Rasulullah. He said, "What do you think of two whose third is Allah?" The famous words. His heart was this ocean of calm. And when we work and practice tawakkul, even in moments like this, we can achieve this calm. Tawakkul frees you from stress and anxiety, even in the most difficult situations. Trusting in Allah also gives you courage. We just heard the beautiful story, and I never, ever get tired of hearing the story of Musa alayhi salam. But tawakkul gives you this courage. It's like your superpower, right? Musa alayhi salam was asked to go face Firaun, who was literally the most powerful man in the world, armed with nothing but the words of Allah, armed with nothing but the signs of Allah. And he was, as we just heard, he was a fugitive, right? He had murdered a man, and he was wanted for murder. So it wasn't in like the same situation as the Prophet ﷺ, who had never done anything wrong, never did. I mean, he called his people and he said, if there was an army on the other side of this mountain, I told you there was an army on the other side of this mountain, what would you believe me? And they said, of course we'd believe you. We've never known you to tell a lie. You're a sadiq al-amin. You are the truth teller. You are the trustworthy. And yet he was persecuted. Imagine had he actually been someone who had murdered one of them. So Musa alayhi salam was in this incredibly difficult situation of not only he's facing the most powerful man in the world, but he is coming from a place of having done something. You know, they're not entirely wrong to be like, you've done something wrong. And so he had to go do that despite all of these fears. And he expressed these fears to Allah. He said, I am not eloquent of speech. Bring with me my brother. He told Allah, I murdered one of them. They are going to hurt me. They're going to say I'm a liar. And yet, despite his fears, it wasn't like he had no fear. He had fear and he expressed it. But his reliance was on Allah. His reliance was on Allah. And if you study the story of when he is, dueling the magicians, they come out, and some narrations say there were 70 magicians, and some say there were up to 70,000 magicians lined up. The stage they were on was like shaking as they came up in front of all of the people on Yawm Zayna, right? The day of festival where everybody was gathered. And all of these expert magicians, which Firaun called from near and far, as we don't know how far he called, but it could have been, his power was vast and his kingdom was vast. So he brought all of these people whose entire life craft was magic, and set them up and said, and told them, incentivized them. He promised them nearness to him. He promised them all of these privileges if they won, if they were the ones who were victorious in this battle. And so he's standing there, him and his brother, against all of these people, in front of all of these people. It would make any one of us tremble. And then they say to him, do you want to go first? He says, no, you can go first. And so they do their thing, and their smoke and mirror magic, with appears with the snakes and everything. And he feels taken aback. He's a little nervous at that moment. He's not someone who feels no fear. But what makes him keep going is Allah reassures him and tells him he is with him. It was tawakkul that gave him the courage to go on, that gave him the courage to throw his stick, which then became a serpent that ate all of the other snakes. The power of the sign was so great that these magicians, whose livelihood was black magic, one of the greatest sins, fell in prostration. That is how great it was. And they know their own craft, so they knew what just happened wasn't magic. It was something much greater. And he had the power, he had the ability to do that because of tawakkul. So tawakkul gives you courage beyond what you think you are capable of. Tawakkul also gives you perseverance in the face of insurmountable odds. And my favorite story to illustrate this is Hajar radiallahu anha. Imagine being in the desert. Have you ever gotten lost in the woods? I mean, the closest thing we have to, what she endured is if you've ever gotten lost in the woods and you didn't know where you were going and you were freaking out and your phone has no signal. Okay, imagine kind of the fear in your heart at that moment, and then expand it like 1,000 times, because she's in the middle of the desert with nothing. And when Ibrahim alayhi salam turned to leave her there with her infant child, she said, "For whom are you leaving us?" And his silence, he didn't even say anything. It was his silence that she understood and asked, "Did your Lord tell you to do this?" And he said, "Yes." And then with all the certainty of a woman of her faith station, she says, "Idhan la yadana." Indeed, or thus, he will not forsaken us. She had certainty from the beginning. She had this tawakkul, and that tawakkul held her through so that she was able to keep looking for water. Her sa'i, any of you who have been to Umrah or Hajj know that we walk in the footsteps of this great woman, one of our mothers. Sa'i literally means to strive. And she was striving back and forth from Safa to Marwa, from Safa to Marwa and back 7 times. Why didn't she give up after the first time? Why didn't she sit and just feel despair? Why did she keep running? And when you go, you'll see that the sunnah for the men is to run, right? Is to actually jog, because that's what she did. And she didn't just jog sigh the first time, it was all 7 times. She didn't slow down. What gave her that kind of perseverance to believe in the solution even when she can't see it, to be so certain and so trusting in the one in control of everything, Allah, that she keeps working even when it seems like there's no solution, to know that the end is going to be an opening, to believe in the opening when you don't see where it is going to come from. That is what tawakkul will deliver for you, is this kind of perseverance in the face of difficult situations in your lives. Tawakkul also does things for our communities, though, and our families, our relationships that often don't get really spoken about. It builds strong families. How does tawakkul build strong families? It builds strong families and communities because if you trust in Allah, you won't have as much of that insecurity and fear of abandonment that can really break down relationships. You can give people more space and more of the ability to do their thing, to be who they are, because you trust in Allah. And finally, it allows others to be free. You know, as I read the Quran, and I completely endorse and encourage what Ustadha Fatima said about the relationship we need to build with the Quran, especially with Ramadan coming. But as you read the Quran, one of the themes that gets repeated over and over and over and over and over is this freedom of conscience, right? You are but a warner. You can believe or you cannot believe. This idea of the confidence by which Allah delivers the message to us in the Quran. By trusting in him, we can allow we don't have to control everybody. We can trust in him and therefore allow people their freedom of conscience, allow people to believe or to not believe if that is their choice, because Allah gives them that choice. That's not on us to give or to take away. So how do we build tawakkul? How do we build tawakkul? And I want to leave time for Q&A. So I'm going to go through this a little faster because you've heard it from a lot of better teachers than I. So first, and this is repeating something that I heard Ustadha Fatima say as well, is get to know who you're trusting, right? You cannot trust someone or something that you don't know. The only way to trust in Allah is to know him, is to know him through his 99 names, is to know him by reading the Quran, is to reflect on the majesty of his creation. Build in your heart awe of this creator. Build in your heart love for Allah. And it is through that awe and that love that tawakkul just springs from, grows out of. If you have a best friend, or say you're one of, a mother that you love, a father that you love, and they've always been there for you and you know them so well, when they say, I've got your back, you believe it. You trust them. Even when you don't quite understand where you're going, if you trust it, when you know someone and you know someone to be both good and competent, right? So the two kind of pillars of trust. I trust someone who is both has my best intentions at heart, or my best interests at heart, and they're good at what they do. So it has to be both. They have to be competent and they have to have good intentions toward me. I'm going to trust them. Wakil, someone asked the question, is wakil and tawakkul from the same root? Yes, your wakil is the one you put your trust in, the one who acts on your affairs, who carries out your affairs for you because you have given them the power. It's almost like a power of attorney. You trust them to do what is best for you because you trust their intentions and you trust their competence. How can we not trust in Allah when he is the creator of the heavens and the earth, the all-powerful, and when we see his incredible mercy toward us? So getting to know Allah is the first step in trusting him. The second thing is to focus in times of trial, when you have to practice tawakkul, to focus on the creator, not the calamity. Meaning, rather than focus on the problem, rather than focus on Goliath and his army that are coming for you, focus on the meeting with your Lord. Focus on the greatness of Allah, and suddenly the calamity and that intimidating, huge, overwhelming problem that you're facing will suddenly become small, will be dwarfed when the focal point of your mental horizon is not the giant and his army, but his creator. Third is, remember the ways that Allah had your back in the past. That's one of the lessons of the Quran, is to teach us all the ways that Allah saved people before us. And remember, and one of the beautiful things of like Surah Ad-Duha is the Prophet ﷺ, when he was feeling down, when his heart was heavy, one of the things that Surah Ad-Duha does, which is really an uplifting and hope-inspiring surah, is to remind him of the ways that he was aided in the past. And this is a powerful strategy, a powerful method to reinvigorate tawakkul, is to remember, hey, wait a minute, we have a track record here. How can I not trust Allah when he helped me all those times before? So reflect on the ways that Allah had your back in the past to build tawakkul in your heart. And number 4, surround yourself with people who trust Allah. And I cannot emphasize this enough. You have to surround yourself with righteous people. And I recommend very strongly that you assemble for yourself a weekly study circle. I know that Yaqeen has a wonderful curriculum that you can use. And so it's not even about having to figure out how to study or what material to use. There's so much out there, and I would recommend the Yaqeen curriculum for conviction circles. But the important thing is to make it a regular meeting of a small group of people, like a small little family, and you become each other's spiritual keepers. You remind each other. You remind each other to trust in Allah when we forget, when it's hard, when we feel down, when we feel despair coming on. So surround yourself with people who trust in Allah and will remind you to trust in Allah. And then 5th and finally, and I'll end here, serve others in need. It might seem counterintuitive or unrelated, but serving others can be one of the most powerful ways to build tawakkul in our hearts. Because as you see how serving others, and they're saying, oh, thank you for helping me. I didn't know what I was going to do. Allah sent you to me. When you see that, when you become a tool of Allah, not only will he also make sure that someone's there to help you, but you will be a part of his plan for someone else's aid. Their tawakkul will be manifested in how you are helping them. And when you're on the other side of that, you will have even more trust in it for yourself. وَقُولِي قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهِ. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ustadha Dalia, for these enlightening topics. We have a couple of questions, and the first one being, especially being a minority, how do you own your Muslim American identities?
Okay, good question, and a difficult one, hard one to answer. You own your Muslim American identity by knowing who you are, what you believe, and most importantly, who you serve. Muslim American identity is all about clarifying who you serve, what you were created for, what you were put on this earth to do. And once that's really clear in your mind, everything else is kind of takes care of itself. But our identity is first and foremost as servants of Allah. If our identity has to be emanating in the concept of ubudiyya, of serving Allah. We are not a tribe. We're not a special interest group in that way. We are servants of Allah, and we have to be principled in our identity.
Thank you so much. So our second question is, how do we shift our perspective from feeling that Allah is placing hardships in our lives as tests and not as punishments?
Okay, beautiful question. So the hardships in our lives do 3 things. They purify us, they protect us, and they prepare us. These are the functions. In summary, this is the purpose of hardships in our lives. Now, to feel like a hardship is a punishment is to think of Allah in a way that is not befitting His majesty. And why I say that? Because it only becomes a punishment when I decide it's a punishment by responding the wrong way. But if the calamity makes me rethink my ways and purify my heart and become closer to Allah, which is all a choice I can make, then it's not a punishment at all. So I decide if it's a punishment. Allah's not punishing me. He's giving me an opportunity. That's what a calamity is. And by the way, prosperity can be just as hard of a test as calamities. So they're all opportunities. And the only question we need to ask is, how do I behave in this moment as a abd, as a servant of Allah? So responding in a ubudiyya way is how it becomes a purification. And then the other thing I want to point out is every calamity is a protection as well. And I mean that. You are being protected from something else that you do not see. And I have so many examples of this from my own life, where later on I realized, oh my God, that calamity that I was so worried about, it was actually protecting me from something else that's far worse. And it prepares you for helping someone else in the future that is going through the same thing. So think of your calamities in these three ways.
Thank you so much. I love the part where you said every calamity is a protection from something we don't see. That's so important. So our third question is, why is Islam declining among the younger generations with religious discrimination against American Muslims? And how can our youth tackle this hardship and embrace their identities?
So why is it declining? Well, a couple of things I want to maybe share. So first of all, when you look at the United States in general and among young people overall in the general public, according to all the research, religion is declining dramatically, right? So whether Christian or most studies are about Christians, the likelihood that they go to church is like half as likely as their elders. The percentage who say religion is an important part of their life has declined, generation after generation, and now only a minority of sort of like millennials or younger even say that they are a part of a religion. So this is an overall trend in our country. Now, what about among Muslims? Is that also the case? It is, but much less. It's actually much less. Now, I know we see it and we're like alarmed when we see a statistic like, 1 in 5 of people raised Muslim as adults no longer identify as Muslim. And we are like alarmed by that. We are like terrified by that. And I'm not denying that statistic, but what you don't see is it's the least likely of any group in America to change religions or lose their religion. So it is a global problem. It is a problem of growing secularism and atheism, which we're not immune to, but we are a lot less susceptible to than other people. It's way worse for the general public and other faith groups. Now, that doesn't mean we don't worry about it. So what can we do? Well, that's why like an organization like Yaqeen exists, right? Is to, and I'm not a staff of Yaqeen, but I'm an advisor. And what Yaqeen tries to do is to build conviction by answering people's questions, by offering education. The other thing we need to do is we need to walk the walk, right? We need to be a community of principle. We need to be a community that acts as we are called to act and live the values that we are called to. Because a lot of people lose heart, not in the faith as it's taught or as it's in the Quran, but a lot of times they're just disillusioned with, some of the stuff we see in our community. And I want to emphasize something. We're no worse than anyone else. So it's not like there's no like such thing as Muslim pathology where we're like the worst people in the world and we're so corrupt and we're so hypocritical. No, it's a human problem, right? And so that's why so many people leave religion generally. And it exists in our community too. But that's one thing we can do is address some of our internal problems, whether it's racism or misogyny or looking down on the poor or classism, whatever it is, self-interest and crazy, battles of egos in our organizations. We need to address these things, and I think it'll help a lot keep us strong and keep us united.